Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko claimed that his country has received Russian tactical nuclear weapons, which are reportedly 3 times more powerful than the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This alleged deployment outside of Russia marks the first time since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Lukashenko mentioned that the weapons were received as missiles and bombs, and he sees their presence as a deterrent against potential aggressors.
In this video, we explore the intricate dynamics surrounding Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. We delve into the internal divisions within Belarus, Lukashenko's authoritarian rule, and the opposition movement. Additionally, we discuss the failed Russian advance, resistance within Belarus, and the implications of the Ukrainian conflict for Eastern Europe's future. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos.
Tensions escalate. Russia's reinforcement near Ukrainian border raises concerns of a second attack from Belarus. In early 2022, Russia deployed a large number of troops into Belarus, a close ally of the Kremlin, as part of its plans to invade Ukraine. Belarus, strategically located west of Russia and north of Ukraine, shares a border of over 1,000 kilometers with Ukraine, with its capital Kiev situated just 90 kilometers away. The Russian forces, numbering around 30,000, launched a swift attack towards Kiev with the aim of occupying the city, overthrowing the government, and ending the war on their terms. However, they faced stronger resistance from Ukraine than anticipated, encountering logistical difficulties, equipment problems, and morale issues. Unable to capture Kiev and suffering significant casualties, the Russian troops retreated to Belarus. Despite the withdrawal, Russian missile systems and artillery based in Belarus continued to target Ukraine in the following months.
Recent Western satellite imagery indicates a potential second Russian attack from Belarus on Kiev. Approximately 20,000 Russian troops have reportedly re-entered Belarus and are amassing near the Ukrainian border. Railways from Russia have been used to transport military equipment through Belarus, and new roads are being constructed towards the border. Although concerns have arisen about Belarusian forces joining the attack, it remains unclear why Belarus, a nominal Russian ally, has refrained from deploying its troops. Belarus has granted safe passage and access to its bases for Russian attacks on Ukraine but has not directly engaged in combat. The motivations behind this strategy and the possibility of a shift in Belarus's stance are uncertain.
Belarus, a tug-of-war between authoritarian rule and geopolitical interests. Understanding the current situation in Belarus requires an examination of the events that unfolded in 2020. Alexander Lukashenko has ruled Belarus since the 1990s, initially winning the country's first free election in 1994. However, subsequent elections have been widely disputed internationally. Lukashenko has established an authoritarian regime, often referred to as the last dictatorship in Europe, aiming to maintain Belarus as a miniature version of the Soviet Union. State ownership dominates the economy, Russian language and influence prevail, and the KGB, the Belarusian State Security Service, retains its Soviet-era structure. Press freedom and civil liberties are limited, and capital punishment is still practiced. While Belarus and Russia have pursued closer integration through agreements like the Union State, full unification has not been realized. Nevertheless, Belarus maintains close ties with Russia in military cooperation and economic integration, despite not forming a unified state officially.
Russia's involvement and geopolitical interests in Belarus are of great significance. Russia seeks to keep Lukashenko in power as Belarus serves as a buffer state between Russia and NATO, while Ukraine has moved closer to the EU and NATO, distancing itself from Moscow. However, beneath the surface, Belarus faces internal divisions. Western observers consistently denounce Belarusian elections as rigged and fraudulent. Lukashenko's over 26-year rule has resulted in a generation of Belarusians, particularly those under 28, who have only experienced his authoritarian regime.
In 2010, protests erupted after Lukashenko's disputed re-election, leading to the arrest of hundreds, including political opponents. Similar fraudulent elections took place in 2015. The pivotal 2020 election saw Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya emerge as the primary opposition candidate. Tsikhanouskaya demanded the release of political prisoners and the termination of the Union State Treaty with Russia, which would end discussions of Belarus merging with Russia. Anticipating election fraud, Tsikhanouskaya urged supporters to document their ballots, revealing widespread irregularities. Massive anti-regime protests ensued, met with harsh repression by Lukashenko's forces, resulting in arrests, injuries, and deaths. Fearing coup or assassination plots, Lukashenko amended the constitution, enabling a transfer of power to the National Security Council upon his death, solidifying a hereditary dictatorship.
In May 2021, a major confrontation between Lukashenko's regime and the West occurred when a Ryanair flight was forcibly diverted to Minsk, leading to the arrest of opposition activist Roman Protasevich. This incident resulted in increased sanctions from the EU and other Western countries against Lukashenko. Belarus remains in a tense situation, with ongoing protests and international pressure. While historically supported by Russia, tensions and disagreements exist between the two countries. The West, including the EU and the US, condemns Lukashenko's actions and refuses to recognize him as Belarus's legitimate president. Additionally, Belarus has been involved in a migration crisis, with accusations of state-sponsored human trafficking as migrants are directed towards EU borders, resulting in a humanitarian catastrophe and the construction of a border wall by neighboring countries.
While Lukashenko relies on the loyalty of the Belarusian armed forces, they are vastly inferior to the Russian or Ukrainian armed forces. Belarusian military service is compulsory for men, resulting in a largely conscript-based force. Estimates suggest that only around 10,000 of the 62,000 active duty troops are combat-ready, equipped with outdated Soviet-era weaponry. Lukashenko is aware of their vulnerability and does not want to risk their lives by committing them to a war in Ukraine, where they would likely face significant casualties.
Belarus in the crossfire. Lukashenko's balancing act, Ukrainian resistance, and the uncertain future of Eastern Europe. After the failed Russian advance on Crimea from Belarus in early 2022, Ukraine took precautions by laying landmines along the entire border region to deter future offensives. Lukashenko's decision to refuse sending Belarusian troops to fight alongside Russia in Ukraine has garnered some support among Belarusians, who strongly disapprove of such involvement. Resistance within Belarus against allowing Russia to use the country as a base for attacking Ukraine has emerged, with partisans engaging in acts of sabotage, targeting railways to impede the transport of Russian troops and equipment. Despite the Lukashenko regime labeling these actions as terrorism, Belarusians with combat experience have defected and joined the Ukrainian armed forces, seeing Ukraine's struggle against authoritarianism as their own fight.
The outcome of the war in Ukraine holds significant implications for Lukashenko's future. If Ukraine emerges victorious and Putin loses power, Lukashenko, heavily reliant on Russian support, would face a precarious situation. Belarusian volunteers fighting for Ukraine understand that if Lukashenko commits the bulk of the Belarusian armed forces to the invasion, Belarusians would essentially be fighting against their own people on Ukrainian soil, leading to dire consequences for the regime. While there is speculation that the Russian presence in Belarus is a diversion to draw Ukrainian troops away from the actual front line in the east, the situation remains highly unpredictable, and any military action in the region carries significant concerns.
Before the war began in January 2022, Lukashenko may have felt pressured to align with Moscow. Just 3 days after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, he ordered a constitutional referendum in Belarus, which passed and extended his presidency until 2035. This referendum further solidified ties with Moscow, renouncing Belarus's policy of neutrality and granting Russia the right to station nuclear warheads on Belarusian territory as a countermeasure if NATO deploys nuclear warheads to Poland or Lithuania.
If the situation in Ukraine continues to deteriorate for Russia, they may consider involving the small and vulnerable Belarusian armed forces as a last-ditch effort. However, this would likely lead to the collapse of the Lukashenko regime, either through pressure from pro-democracy activists in Poland or Belarus being absorbed into Russia. The consequences of such a move would be uncertain and could further plunge Belarus into chaos.
The consequences of the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991 continue to unfold, with Eastern Europe's future hanging in the balance in 2023. Russia's strategy of conquering Ukraine while expecting Europe to turn a blind eye is facing obstacles. In 2022, Russia deliberately decreased its natural gas supplies to Europe, hoping to cause soaring prices and disrupt industries. However, an unexpectedly warm winter has resulted in lower gas usage and a return to pre-war prices, challenging Putin's expectations. This situation not only shields Europe from energy blackmail, but also underscores the long-term implications of climate change, as warmer winters pose economic, health, and societal challenges that must be addressed.